I will speak about democratization. I will speak about democratization. I will remain faithful for my understanding of what a concept is. A concept is an answer to the question, what is X? And it is an answer that tries to capture the multiplicity of the multiplicity of the phenomena that can be assembled together, and it tries to assemble them together in something that looks like a picture, but it's actually and is framed like a picture, but this framing is very unstable, and it includes the never-ending hovering above the field of this phenomena in order to revise and re-articulate what the concept is supposed to capture, how the manifold is grouped together. And in this movement, it never stops to reframe the picture. And I will do it by using what seems to me quite commonsensical assertions about democratization. Not the common sense that Ainsley talked about, but the common sense that you think that you have until someone says something which is completely on the opposite, and you realize that it's not so common sense, and you start to think about it. So I'll start from the dictionary. According to the Oxford Dictionary, democratization is the action of making something more democratic in organization or character, and also the process of becoming democratic. Democratic, in turn, is of or related to democracy or consistent with its principles, and democracy is government by the people, especially a system of government in which all the people of a state or polity are involved in making decisions about its affairs. The linguistic and cognitive order is clear. First, a system of government of a distinct kind, or at least an idea that captures it. Then, identifiable attributes, features, or elements that are characteristics of that system. And finally, the action of bringing it about. Thus, democracy is placed as the end for which democratization is the means, and democratization owes its meaning to democracy. Democracy is conceived idealistically here. All the people of a state or polity are involved, etc. And so is the order and relations implied in the grammarian's definition. Once the meaning of democratization is derived from a concept of democracy, democratization would keep the ideal type nature of the latter and privilege abstracted and idealized descriptions of the real efforts and struggles which democratization consists of. These efforts and struggles are rendered here realizations or applications of democracy's idealized attributes. To avoid this idealistic approach and counter it, I would like to start my conceptualization by an hypothesis. I would like to define democratization as the practice and the struggle that open an existing formation of power for those ruled and governed within it. So all I need is this opening. Logically speaking, any formation of power may be democratized. The first ontological presupposition of democratization is a specific inflection of this condition of being together with others, being with others. Being with others is being ruled and governed by the same ruling powers. As far as democratization is concerned, the rest is contingent and determined by historical, political, economic circumstances. The concept of democratization does not presuppose neither the formation of the existing ruling power it targets, nor the power's capacity to accommodate transformations. Furthermore, no a priori requirements regarding the boundaries of the realm that is initially open for democratization and the forces struggling to withdraw these boundaries are necessary. A concept of democratization requires no a priori limits on what can be democratized and how. These limits, and there are many of course, come from elsewhere and should be left there elsewhere in theory and crossed in practice. And the last thing democratization requires is democracy. More specifically and more urgently, democratization should not be limited by or to the modern state formation. This formation of power and conglomeration of multiple ruling and governing apparatuses, which now covers exhaustively the entire land on planet Earth, with some enclaves for the richest, is certainly the most consequential, the most urgent site for democratization. But it is by no means the framework which democratization must presuppose or be limited to. The global trajectory of democratization has long succumbed to state power and to the image of the nation in the name of which the state speaks and acts. But this is due to coercion, including the power of the many, nationalists, chauvinists, racists, and their like. It is not derived from the limitation that thought or theory place on political imagination. Along with the state, and increasingly working through and against it, neoliberal capitalism is the major force that limits and suppresses the political imagination necessary for the struggle to democratize. It is increasingly more difficult to imagine, let alone to practice, effective limits on capital. For example, limits on the right to appropriate the commons, or election in which the state and not corporations funds election campaigns. It is equally difficult to imagine lifting restrictions on the multitude. For example, borders that are open not only to commodities but to people who produce them, or the use of workers' labor as leverage in political struggles. Not even one of the existing restrictions on the democratic process owes its rationale to the concept or the practice of democratization itself. These restrictions belong to the formations of power where the many seek an opening because their lives are impacted while their wills and well-being are ignored. Democratization may be advanced by a whole spectrum of changes introduced into the work of power, including rendering power more transparent, better articulated, more clearly understood, enabling more aspects of that power to be problematized in public, letting diverse voices reflect on what has been problematized, discuss it and suggest alternatives, granting more people a voice in the decision-making and a hand in implementing it. To democratize, one needs to know how power works, the complexity of power relations, the hidden agendas and the deals behind the closed doors, etc. But the nature of the opening should be left rather indeterminate. Doors, windows, hearts, and minds, each and all may be relevant. Thus, for example, a struggle over the transparency of power is potentially a struggle for democratization even before the next step is being taken, because more transparent power offers more sites for future openings of power. While the openings should be left indeterminate, their goal is crucial. They should be means for a more equal sharing of power. In principle, power is always shared. The master and the slave may share one whip, to which they are attached unequally from opposite sides. The openings which the democratization seeks are sites where a combination or a fusion of freedom and equality, or equilibrity, as Balibar would have called it, could be injected into power's operations. More liberty and more equality, distributed more equally among more people, are always possible. And this is the second ontological presupposition of democratization. It is always possible to democratize. But the nature of this fusion is never preset. The distribution of the two elements is never stable, and gains in liberty may come at the expense of equality and vice versa, and different proportions may be distributed differently in each and new opening. And as long as the two components exist in the fusion, tilting the existing balance of freedom and equality toward one side may not stop democratization, but will affect where it is more urgently needed. To democratize, then, is to create conditions in which the many can take some part in the ruling and to extend this part as much as possible. Under these conditions, one knows when and how one is ruled, and why one is ruled, and why one is ruled in this or that way, and is ruled like or unlike others. To democratize is to secure conditions under which this knowledge can be articulated and shared with many, questioned freely in public, and collaboration among many to contest and oppose the modes of ruling and governance that have been exposed are possible. Ideally, when conducted peacefully, these concerted struggles should be protected from power's wrath. But the protection is a virtue of certain regimes, not of others, and is not a necessary condition for the labor of democratization. As a set of diverse practices, canvassing, sending letters, advocating, litigation, etc., democratization is often tedious and repetitive. As a struggle, it may involve violence and patience, love and suffering, and both practice and struggle are many and take time. Success is never guaranteed. Advance is usually slow and instrumental, with many setbacks and rare joyful tipping points. The tipping points may be short-lived. A democratized constellation of power may be fragile, disappointments are common, and even achievements gained over a long period of time might be steadily or abruptly eroded, as we see today. I refer to these practices and struggles and to the effort they involve as labor. Democratization's phenomenal field span over the social spaces where this labor can be imagined as possible. This is where the phenomena, including discursive phenomena, that the concept seeks to grasp and bring together and elucidate may appear. I will take some liberty to use the labor term, the term labor here, and play with Arendt's distinction between labor, work, and action. And so, democratization may be considered labor because it never designates a finished product, and because its blessing or joy is the human way to experience the sheer bliss of being free. The blessing of this labor is that the effort and gratification follow each other as closely as producing and consuming the means of freedom's subsistence. I was quoting from Arendt's Human Condition, replacing life with freedom. This claim must be qualified, of course. Arendt's chapter on labor in the human condition is where she is most removed from the common and from the world which the common presupposes. Labor for her may be imagined, not necessarily, but may be imagined in solitude, devoid of any lasting collaboration with others. Speaking of democratization as labor presupposes at least one element of a shared world, the ruling power that brings many individuals together, and the condition of being ruled alongside each other. This is still implied by the ontological condition discussed above. What the many share beyond this subjection to the same power varies and is contingent, but because of the nature of their subjection to a power formation that rules and governs them as many, while grouping and separating them, because of this, democratization must be a project of concerted labor, carried by a multitude. No one can advance it single-handedly, and it requires coordination and collaboration in a variety of tasks distributed across the social space within and across small and large groups. These groups may be bounded more or less fluidly, but be more or less institutionalized and more or less connected. There is a division of and distribution of labor. There may be a division of and distribution of labor among these groups, but it is not necessarily orchestrated and rarely a form of a concerted action. But at least at the level of the small group, the labor must be coordinated, involving many who are entangled together in a struggle whilst preserving the temporality of labor, the tediousness and monotony of the effort, and the short life, fragility, or sheer lack of end product that characterized Arendtian labor. The scope, intensity, and sophistication of this collaborative labor depend on what is being democratized, how many are involved in the struggle, and the extent to which the collaborative labor itself has been institutionalized, solidified into power structures and mode of action, which may or may not be democratic in themselves. Democratization has been often carried out by non-democratic groups. The history of democratic revolutionary movements and of democratic transformations knows many examples of this unresolved tension between the ends of democratization, the end of the democratizing labor, and its means. The seasonal, cyclical aspect of labor is not a gift of nature and does not involve its elements, but rather the result of the inherent fragility of democratic institutions and the recurrent disposition of those in power to take back whatever authority is available, and the tendency of the governed to let this happen, for the labor which democratization involves might be exhausting and its fruits are not easily consumed, let alone preserved. It takes civic education to appreciate the value of the democratic process and cherish its fruit when democratic labor yields them, or its process, that is labor itself, when no plant comes to fruition. It takes an existing democratic habitus, or what Mark Gladys called yesterday in second nature, existing democratic habitus to preserve new fruits harvested by new cycles of democratization. The circularity here is clear. Labor is required not only to reform or transform institutions of power, but to make one disposed to engage in this labor in the first place and be appreciative of its fruit, which often vanished quickly or rotten when those elected to office democratically abuse the power given to them. But it may also happen that the fruits of this labor can be cherished among the laborers regardless of their success in opening power structures. For the struggle itself may create temporary enclaves where the laborers share the power they already have. Some or even large part of the labor of democratization may be organized as work, and some may happen as action. But democratization may take place without either of them. On the one hand, the labor of democratization may originate from sharing grievances in public and discussing how to address them. And it may start with neither a clear plan of action nor a design for an end product in mind. On the other hand, this labor cannot stop with such an event or with the approval of the institutional reform either. Indeed, democratization may often be narrated as a process that was generated and motivated, but also interrupted or suspended by eventful actions. And sometimes the narrative is truthful. A politicized strike, a speech in a mass demonstration, a resignation from public office, followed by a call for civil disobedience, all of this could serve as example here. Each of these may ignite, fuel, and maintain the democratization process, or be ascribed with such power. But even a series of such actions is not enough for achieving, let alone securing, a more democratic sharing of power. Action is an event, and its impact lies in the minds and hands of those impacted by it and depends on their response. Dramatic events, whether they are located at the tipping point of a long process or at the heart of an unexpected rupture in existing institutions, may bring forth the demos, in whatever form the demos may take, and temporarily relieve the demos from subjection. But they do not suffice to create their authority to rule or guarantee subjection to this authority. To succeed, the labor of democratization must ascribe new rules into the institutions of power which it targets, or to reconstruct them thoroughly if necessary. This implies the need to reform or reinvent the institutional culture so it can protect the new rules from becoming dead letters. Here, work is needed. A plan and design for a better institution and the use of legislation or regulation to achieve it. Unlike the carpenter's table, however, a solid artifact that requires easy maintenance, the artifacts of this work must be constantly cultivated to be preserved. The implementation of the reform is an open-ended process, and attentive follow-up, struggles, advocacy, and activism may be needed to deal with numerous obstacles, some of which are deliberately created by the reform's opponents. Institutional rules require democratic institutional culture, which cannot be completely dissociated from a democratic civic culture at large. This civic culture, in its turn, cannot survive if it is completely dissociated from the workplace and the household, from the school and the police, and above all, from the markets. For all these sides of human interaction take part in providing or obstructing that infrastructure for a democratic civic culture, its contents and forms of acculturation. If by dictates of powers, laws, or tradition, democratization ceases at the doors of the workplace, or the school, or the corporation's office, a democratic civic culture shrinks accordingly. The democratic subjects, that is, those who may rule and be ruled democratically, must be regenerated and reformed everywhere, and the task of their regeneration is given in the hand of the many who are supposed to already be democratic subjects themselves, but may still, or once again, need democratic habituation. At the same time, the ongoing labor of any project of democratization may yield new possibilities or appetites for new confrontations, as well as the rewards of acting together, the joy of being with and among equals. Clearly, democratization is an unfinished and unfinishable project. There's no end to democratization. Its indefinite nature requires one to welcome even the narrowest opening of a power formation to the many who are ruled and governed within it. And we heard this morning and yesterday about such moments. This is ever more important when a democratic civic culture like ours is structurally dissociated from the markets, disciplinary institutions, the production of knowledge, and the workplace. Every opening is a crack to be widened. Each widened crack is a site for civic interaction that may shelter further labor of democratization. Each unionized Starbucks store, any student, teacher, or teacher union, any local independent newspaper, even a single condominium meeting may count and should count, may count for its effect in the long run, and should count now for its potentiality. Even under the best circumstances, however, there is always a huge surplus of power to be exposed, articulated, problematized, and democratized. Thematically, it can be described as I describe it here. There is always more non-articulated power than articulated power, etc., etc. This radical asymmetry determines the endless task of democratization in a modern state and the relatively meager impact of its best achievements. Within our contemporary neoliberal economy and neo-colonial power formations, the efforts seem truly Sisyphean. Without a tangible end and with such a small chance of success, and so much empty talk about hope against all odds in front of mounting counter-democratic forces, from the neoliberal economy and its plutocratic and kleptocratic chars to the natural forces unleashed by capitalist unstoppable extractions, how different is the labor of democratization from Sisyphus rolling his boulder up his hill in Taratus. Our only hope to escape the mythical trickster's fate is to remember that our task was not made impossible by a god with whom no human could compete. What makes our task Sisyphean is the obedience of multiple humans who could choose otherwise. Mm-hmm. This obedience, without risking immediate death, may always serve as a crack where even with risking immediate death, may always serve as a crack where the labor of democratization take place. This crack, or better, a creek, bank, or a cove, always presuppose the logical or chronological primacy of the powers that be. And as such, and in all its aspects as a practice, democratization is secondary to the existing power formations in which the ruled try to force an opening, so they too can take part in the ruling. This determines the inherent grave belatedness of the democratizing process. It usually takes place long after a power has been institutionalized and its institutional culture has been well inscribed in the bodies and minds of the ruled subjects. Belatedness is also and most clearly the case when the ruled try to respond to a process of democratizing existing power formations. Our universities and our own experience in confronting its neoliberal corporatization may serve here as a clear example. Our helplessness in confronting it is among the things, I think, that prepare the ground for the present champion world. This presupposition and the nature of power to which democratization responds are more important than the idea of democracy that may drive it. As a distinct regime formation, democracy is an ideal type. One may capture this ideal type with the help of a well-explicated concept, or operationalize it and substitute it with some trodden cliches. But none of these should be considered as the telos of democratization, even when they are guiding some of the labor. When known, thought, and reflected upon, they may serve as good means to advance democratization, and they may serve as such means even or especially when they appear the goal of democratization, for the indefinite distance from the goal which the ideal introduces into the practice of democratization guarantees its perpetual motion, letting it become an end in itself and for itself. As such, democratization is at one and the same time a set of practices and their raison d'etre, not being ruled without being able to take some part in the ruling. The concept of democracy, or democracy as an ideal type, may but does not have to serve the logic of these practices. When these practices cease, and on the other side of their boundaries, however these boundaries are set, where democratization has become impossible, the ideal type becomes a dead letter. When it is invoked beyond these boundaries, as it is often the case, democracy may indeed signal the end of democratization, its literal end, a sheer lifeless ideal, a negation of the real. Democratization is not a means to achieve democracy, maintain or improve it. Democratization is rather the end for which democracy may serve as one of the means. The labor of democratization is the never-ending form of being together of free people who feel that they and others for whom they care are ruled against their best judgment and without their consent, most often at their expense, and for many of them at their grave risk. The immediate goal of this struggle is to expand the realm in which more among the ruled can make a difference in the way they are ruled, without, however, any guarantee that such a reform or transformation should serve the interest of those who devote their time to the struggle. When such guarantee is inscribed into the democratic process, its boundaries are set in advance, and not by the ruling power, but by the ruled. The asymmetry of the struggle for democratization is ontologically given, but not the radical proportion of that asymmetry today, and not the grave deficiency in democratization. This proportion has been historically constructed through political and economic struggles and should not be interpreted as a natural outcome of the exponential growth in the realms of life that have been colonized by the modern state or by the neoliberal economy which the state serves today. The asymmetry should be understood as a result of a contingent effort to undo democratization and undermine the conditions of its possibility. And this is crucial, undermine the conditions of its possibility. Neoliberalism should be reconstructed as an evolving assemblage of long-lasting projects of de-democratization. Project 2025 is a blueprint to accelerate and consolidate the de-democratization of America. Today, after half a century in which the neoliberal has replaced the liberal as the qualifier of democracy, we are witnessing the dwindling down of the energy and scope of the labor of the democratization. We are living in the dusk of democracy as we have known it. We have already entered the part of the world where risk of death accompanies democratization. One might accompany it once again, or might accompany this risk, might accompany it once again, threatening to reduce much of its labor to sheer struggle, if not to dust. It seems to me irresponsible to speak about hope today, other than a placebo discursive pill. Against despair, one should offer the labor of democratization, which, for those who have not engaged in it yet, may start here and now, and with and among free and equal comrades, committed to that kind of labor where they may find, I'm quoting Arendt again, the human way to experience the sheer bliss of being free and the gratification of producing and consuming the means of freedom's subsistence. Sorry. Thank you.